Hi, thank you. I'm Gail Sapien. I'm the president of the Durand-Hedden House and Garden. And we are so thrilled that so many of you have come today because it's going to be a wonderful program. Durand-Hedden is in the process of raising money for our new roof because the roof on this 200-something-year-old house is over 100 years old and needs to be replaced. And you will see over the coming months and year that we will be having more fundraising events. But if you want to donate to our roof fund, we are happy to get your donation. And we really thank you for coming today. It's a really exciting program. We are also have up at the house, which we invite you to visit afterwards. It's right up to Ridgewood Road and then a block over to the right. We have an art exhibit in our carriage house, and we have a beautiful exhibit on the wall done by Barbara Dreyfus and Patty Christman and myself and Don Maxton about Olmsted and the Hudson River School, just as you'll learn about today. And the exhibit goes into detail about the relationships and how the Olmsted Parks came to be with the inspiration of the Hudson River School. It's an amazing tie-in because, as you know, Asher Durand lived right at the next corner near the Durand-Hedden house, and his brother, Henry, actually lived at the Durand-Hedden house for many, many years with his family. So it's a very personal thing to Maplewood as well as to Central Park and all the other beautiful parks that Olmsted created. We are so excited to have Sara Cedar Miller as our speaker today. She has been the historian emerita of Central Park Conservancy since 2017, and before that she was the Conservancy photographer and historian from the 1980s until her retirement. She's the author of 4 books about Central Park, including Central Park, an American Masterpiece, Strawberry Fields, Seeing Central Park, the official guidebook, and Before Central Park, which won an award from the University of Virginia Center for Cultural Landscapes. Her photographs have been distributed nationwide and worldwide, and she's appeared on radio and TV and in many documentaries about Central Park. She gives specialized tours and lectures on the park's history, and in 2020, she was honored as a preservation hero by the Library of American Landscape History and was an honoree at the Conservancy's Frederick Law Olmsted Awards luncheon in 2023. And now I'd like to introduce Sara Cedar Miller.
So can everybody hear? Okay, back there? Yeah, good. Okay, oh, right, I don't get to change the slides. Today we will talk about Central Park. As you can see on the left is louder. Let me try to, you know what, I'll just hold it. Diaphragmatic can change, so I'll hold it. Now this is okay? Okay, perfect. So as you can see, a painting by Asher B. Durand on the left and a picture that I took of Central Park on the right. So very similar indeed. Next slide, please. So of course, Asher B. Durand's most famous painting is Kindred Spirits, which was in the New York Public Library for many years and is now at the Crystal Bridges Museum in Arkansas. And it's a painting I'm going to talk about in a minute, but one of the figures is Thomas Cole, the Hudson River School painter, and he is with William Cullen Bryant, the romantic poet, and more importantly for us, he is the was the editor for the New York Evening Post. And when William Cullen Bryant wrote an op-ed piece, what we would have called an op-ed piece, on July 3rd, 1844, he said, tomorrow is the nation's celebrating the nation's birthday, and everyone, has a vacation, but there's nowhere to go. It's not as if you could go on a long trip, and in the city there was no beautiful parks, no places to go, nothing was really developed along the river. There were a couple of tiny little postage stamp parks, squares more or less, throughout the city, and he proposed in 1844 that there be a park. That took many years in the making, but he is often cited as the father of Central Park because it was he who threw the first ball out to get the ball rolling and wind up with the park. Next slide, please. So in 1851, everybody was all excited, and the mayoral election of 1851, there were two mayors, and they both more or less proposed having a big park for the city, and they knew that would be good for business, and the citizens needed it as well. And so they almost took the land that, if you could see the slide, Jones Park, that's the one down on the East River. Right now it's where all the hospitals are. It was from like 68th Street to 73rd Street, the river to 3rd Avenue. And it was 150 acres, and it was beautifully developed, owned by the Jones and Skirmihorn family. They had, century-old trees, and all you had to do was make a few paths and you would have a park. Well, that wasn't satisfactory for most people. And long story short, lots of politics, as you can imagine. And someone else proposed another site called the Central Site. It didn't have a name. They just referred to it as the Central Site because it was more central to the island of Manhattan. Those two white squares where it says Central Park, one is the original reservoir, the lower reservoir, that is now the Great Lawn in Central Park. 79th Street to 86th Street, and it was built in 1832, long before any concept of a park existed. And then they needed another reservoir, and so they looked all around the city, where were they going to put another reservoir, and they finally decided to put it behind the receiving reservoir, and originally going to be a rectangle. And the land was there was much more land. It was owned by the city for the most part, or a large part of it. And you can have a much bigger park. And so after much ado, the state legislature, who was in charge of deciding where the park was going to go, took both Central Park and Jones Park and the connecting link of 65th Street area. They took the whole thing, 900 acres. A year later, they dropped the Jones Park and took Central Park from 59th Street to 106th Street. It took another, I think it's 8 years, before they also took the land to 110th Street, where the park is today. And it cost $5 million just to buy the land from 59th Street to 106th Street, which was an exorbitant amount of money. So much so, because originally in 1853, they thought that the land was only going to be $1.3 million, but land had become incredibly expensive in the ensuing years. And so by 1855, when they priced out the land to buy from not just the city, but all the property owners who lived or owned in Central Park, it was $5 million, and most of the people said, forget it. It's too expensive, we don't want it. Who needs that big a park? So enough people with influence definitely pushed and pushed, and so they bought the land for $5 million to 59th Street, and then they were sorry they didn't buy the land to 110th Street, and they paid an additional $1.3 million for that, because by then it was really expensive. And so it was almost $7 million to buy all of Central Park. 4 years later, they bought all of Alaska for $7 million. So 110 million acres versus 843 acres. So you decide which one is the more expensive. Next slide, please. So this is part of Central Park in 1857 when they started construction or deconstruction. You can see a few houses, a lot of swamps, a lot of rocks. There were some really nice homes, and about 1,000 people had to leave in 1857. They either owned the land or were renting. There were probably people squatting as well, but they didn't put those in any numbers, so we don't know how many were. But you can see the park was anything but the beautiful place it is today. Next slide. And this too is looking out over the lake, what became the lake in Central Park. Next slide. And there were some shanties. These are little one-room shanties that were probably inhabited by the poorest people who lived in the park, which were the Irish for the most part. You can see right over on the right, there's a fence and enclosing the animals that they would have had, raised pigs, sheep, goats, and they're beginning to build the road. You could see the telegraph poles, and they had the telegraph had just come to New York. Next slide. The condition in the city was such that in the 1840s and 50s, New York City received the largest stream of immigration that it had ever had, with the Irish and Germans in the mid-1840s to the early 1850s. Particularly unhealthy living conditions downtown, and in the houses that were fire traps, and terrible infant mortality. New York City had some of the highest infant mortality in the country, and so social reformers knew that the city needed a park. And then the well-to-do and the business population, they wanted a park because they knew that that would attract people to New York City and make it a great metropolis. In Europe, of course, there were the great parks in Paris and in London and also Munich. And New York City wanted to be a great metropolis, but even before libraries, universities, museums, everyone knew that what defined a great city was a great park. And so the business community and the social reformers all had reasons to spend the money and make this great park that would take, this much money and that much land out of the tax base of the city. It was very, very forward thinking. Not that there weren't many people who were against it. Next slide, please. And so this is a park in London, and this is what they would have wanted, carried. You got dressed up to go to the park. You wore your Sunday best. Often for poor people, the only time they could come was on a Sunday. And then have carriage riding and horseback riding. Next slide, like they did in Europe. They held a design competition. That design competition was created or thought of by Calvert Vaux, who is the man on your right. Everyone knows Frederick Law Olmsted on the left, but it is actually his partner, Calvert Vaux, not originally his partner, who is responsible for Olmsted even being involved in the park. And I wasn't going to tell the story, but I think it's important too because I'm a big Vaux fan. And it turns out that Calvert Vaux saw that the plan that they had from the previous commission of Democrats, Olmsted and Vaux were Republicans, and this is, it's always political, and so Vaux convinced the commissioners, who he was working for as an architect, to hold a design competition. So without that, they may have actually just used the guy, Egbert Ville, who was the chief engineer, because he had already submitted a plan in 1857, or 1856, and he won. There was no competition. They awarded him the plan. Vaux comes along and goes, this is a terrible plan. and we need a better plan. And of course, secretly, he wants to win. And so he goes to the superintendent of the park, Frederick Olmsted, and says, will you partner with me? Because he knows that he had met Olmsted once before in Newburgh, but he knew that he liked working with a partner, first of all. And second, he knew that Olmsted knew the topography better than anyone else because he was paid to clear the land and take down the houses and get rid of all the swamps and all the riffraff stuff that was in the park, gates and a few factories, all of it had to be taken away before they could construct the park. So Fox went to Olmsted and said, will you partner with me in the design competition, which Fox had convinced the Board of Commissioners to hold, and Olmsted said no. This is the part of history that nobody will tell you, especially the Olmsted people. And so Fox, because we know that Fox pleaded with Olmsted to design Prospect Park, and so we have all the letters to know how Fox would nag Olmsted and get on his case to do what he wanted. And we don't have the proof in for Central Park, but we know what kind of relationship they had, and Fox just would not let go until Olmsted said yes. And so the part of the story that Olmsted is the chief designer of Central Park, well, it's actually not at all true. It's actually Calvert Fox who made the whole thing happen. And finally, Olmsted went to Ville, his boss, the engineer, because he didn't want to step on his boss's toes any more than any of us would be very careful of the hierarchy. And he went to Ville. They didn't get along at all, Ville and Olmsted. And could I enter the design competition? And because he knew Ville would resubmit his already accepted plan, and Ville said, yeah, go, whatever, who cares? And never dreaming that the two of them would win, which they did. And just as a little side note, a few years later, Ville sued Olmsted and Fox and the city of New York for stealing his plan. And what happened is the winners of the design competition, Olmsted and Fox, won the acceptable prize of $2,000, which they had to split $1,000 each, significant amount of money. However, Egbert Ville won $9,000 because he was never paid for the plan that he originally was submitted and accepted by the city and published in the annual report of the Board of Commissioners. So he won $9,000 for just himself, while these two had to split $2,000. So it was, these are all the things no one will tell you about Central Park that are the real behind-the-scenes stories. And the financial part is very important, particularly. Next slide, please. So here's the Greenswood plan. And as you can see, there's the rectangle in the middle. That is the original reservoir that was only drained in 1931. It's now the Great Lawn. And the reservoir behind it that we all know as the Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis Reservoir was actually designed. Remember, it was originally a white rectangle on that map. This was the design by Egbert Ville for the reservoir. He said he saved $275,000 by using the contours of the swamp that was there, and it was lined with rock, almost like a bowl. And it was a natural shape rather than a rectangle. And so the reservoir that we know today was not designed by Olmsted and Fox, but their nemesis, Egbert Ville. And in fact, a few years later, Egbert Ville designed a plan for Prospect Park, and he lost to Olmsted and Fox yet again. So they were all not friends. Anyway, you can see the mall down there, and the sheep meadow is that I don't have a pointer, but the empty space, that big open space. And it ends at 106th Street, not to 110th Street. Next slide, please. But I like to say that the park is about 1/3 exactly the same, 1/3 just slightly different, and 1/3 entirely different. And the entirely different was actually the 20th century, 21st century additions and destructions and additions. But throughout the whole 19th century, up until almost the 1930s, the park was pretty much exactly as Olmsted and Fox had designed it. And it is, I propose, the first sentence of my book, Central Park, an American Masterpiece, says Central Park is the most important work of American art of the 19th century, and no painting, no sculpture, and no work of architecture can equal this long-standing masterpiece of landscape architecture. People always think landscape architecture is like the stepsister of the other arts, but when you think about something like Versailles, you have to realize that landscape architecture is a very important part of the visual arts that we, in college, you don't ever study landscape. They might say, oh, and then there's Versailles. But you never really understand there's a wonderful history and an important history of landscape as works of art as well. So the park is a work of art. Next slide, please. And going through Central Park, how to see Central Park is no different than going to a museum. First, you look at a beautiful scene, and then you take a few steps and you look at an entirely different scene. And then you take a few steps and you might see a still life with rocks and plants and boulders. And then you might see a scene of a meadow and cows or a lake. So this is how you see Central Park. They didn't want it to be the same. They wanted variety. They wanted surprise. And so when you're in Central Park and you're strolling and you think that you are creating your destination, they've really created it for you to look at scenes that they've composed, not of oil or charcoal or pencil, but trees, grass, rock, and water. And that is the elements of the park, but they use the park the way the Hudson River School painters used oil paint. And so now we'll look at the way in which the park is a work of art and its influence. Next slide, please. So one of the influences were all the created landed estates in Europe. In England, this is Durand-Hedden, and Fox was English. I don't know if I mentioned that, but he was from London, came to America when he was 22 years old. And they created these were created landscapes as well. Some did have natural lakes or meadows, but for the most part, there were these famous landscape designers like Capability Brown, who in England reconfigured the land for the landed gentry and private estates. Next slide, please. And the first public park that very much resembles Central Park in its elements is Birkenhead Park in Liverpool. It was the first major designed landscape that was created right in about 1852. And Olmsted went to England in 1850, or 52, I'm sorry, I forget the date. But anyway, he almost accidentally didn't see Birkenhead, but he went to buy something at a bakery, and the baker said, "Have you seen our new park?" And he went across the river and saw Birkenhead and was like, "We have nothing like this in America." Little did he know at the time that he would be designing the first major landscape park in America himself. Anyway, but it was an influence in his mind, and of course Calvin Fox knew it as well. Next slide, please. So then, something closer to home, in 1853, you have, what is it, this right here? Forgetting the word. In West Orange, South Orange.
Reservation. South Mountain Reservation.
Eagle Run.
No.
South Mountain is
The one by Haskell. Llewellyn Park, sorry. Yes, so Llewellyn Park is actually predates Central Park. And it was created in 1853, designed by Andrew Jackson Davis. And it was modeled on all these other landscapes. Central Park didn't exist, and Olmsted and Fox didn't know they were going to win a design competition. And so, in fact, in this area, it was the first residential community, but built with curvilinear roads and a ramble, that is the woodlands. It wasn't called the ramble until after Central Park was created. But they had the whole idea of these, beautiful curvilinear meadows, lakes, water bodies, and woodlands. So you actually, in this area, had something like Central Park before Central Park. Next. And so here we have Asher B. Durand on the right and Thomas Cole on the left. So Cole dies in 1848. And Durand is a big follower of him and the first person to buy a Thomas Cole painting. And Cole, I think I haven't said it, is the father of the Hudson River School. They work together. And then when Cole dies, Durand becomes the leader of the Hudson River School. Next slide, please. And so here is Kindred Spirits, which I referred to before, with Thomas Cole and William Cullen Bryant over the Catskill Clove. Basically not a per se exact landscape painting. It's a little bit idealized. But anyway, this is a painting that really is the most famous Hudson River School painting, and Asher B. Durand was commissioned by Jonathan Sturgis, who was a follower and a benefactor of Thomas Cole. And William Cullen Bryant gave the oratory at the funeral for Thomas Cole. And then, of course, because Bryant was so important to the library, it wound up in the New York Public Library, who sadly decommissioned the painting, which I still mourn to this day. And was purchased by Alice Walton for the Crystal Bridges Museum in Arkansas, which I've also seen there, and very sad. But they have a whole video next to it all about the paintings. No other painting in the museum has a video about the painting, so at least they recognize the importance. Okay, so let's go next slide, please. Taking over from Durand, the Hudson River School, is Frederick Church, who needs no introduction. And this is Catskill Creek, a painting that is in the vein of Central Park. It's a lake, and Olmsted and Fox really wanted a mountain. As you walk down, even Calvert Fox says, we were sorry we didn't have a mountain to look at. But New York City doesn't have a mountain. So either way, this is an inspiration. These paintings by Durand and by Calvert Fox as Frederick Church. Next slide. And Calvert Fox's brother-in-law, Jervis McEntee, was Frederick Church's only student. So it goes from Durand to Church to McEntee to Fox. Another reason why Calvert Fox doesn't get enough credit. So this is a woodland scene. Jervis McEntee did many beautiful paintings, some of them at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. They're all over. And he was also Calvert Fox's best friend. They were their wives. Jervis McEntee's sister was Calvert Fox's wife, Mary. Next slide. And so Here is a Durand. I, forgot my notes, so maybe someone here could tell me the name of the painting. But here is again like a meadow and a mountain. But without the mountain, there's the meadow and the pastoral lakes. And Central Park is divided into three kinds of landscapes. Formal landscapes that are man-made looking, and we'll get to that. The pastoral landscape, from the word pasture, which is broad areas of water and broad areas of meadow. Olmsted liked to say that, the city, the people in the city needed to get away as a refuge from that grid and those right angles, and he wanted breathing space. And that's why they called their name the Clan Greensward Clan, because greensward means a big, large meadow dotted with trees. And they wanted big areas of lakes because it felt infinite. So the balance of Central Park is the infinite versus the intimate. And so the infinite are the lakes and meadows, and next slide, we can see those. Here is Sheep Meadow. I wonder why it's called that. The sheep were a gift from England, and they fertilized and grazed on the lawn, and no pictures in the 19th century of people on Sheep Meadow, but you can appreciate why, because the sheep were there and you didn't want to step on the meadow, I guess. And so there were other smaller meadows, but I've never seen a photograph of anyone on the meadow except the shepherd. And so they had a shepherd, and the sheep went to the sheepfold, which is now the world famous Tavern on the Green restaurant. But originally it was where the sheep lived. And the shepherd, I met the grandson of the shepherd who was born in Tavern on the Green when his grandfather was the shepherd. Anyway, next slide, but here's Sheep Meadow. Here it is today. Instead of sheep, we have people. And, it's the largest expanse without ball fields of meadows in the park, 15 acres. Next, and this is the North Meadow up at 102nd Street. And it has ball fields, but not in this picture. But it was originally the largest meadow in the park. Next slide, please. And here is, I think it's called Summer Morning by Asher V. Durand. Beautiful scene of a lake. And here we have in the next slide, Central Park, the lake. And you can see the Dakota sticking up over the trees. And that's the beginning of the San Remo that now has 2 towers, not just that one little tower. And of course, the boats always had shade. It was, they were protected, or that the ladies had parasols. You always kept yourself out of the sun. And in 1857, Otis invented the elevator. And Olmsted and Vaux in 1857 were designing Central Park, but never dreamt that their trees buildings would grow up over the trees in the park. They had no concept of that. And I like to think that Calvert Vaux, an architect, would have loved the skyline of New York. But Frederick Law Olmsted Jr. said that the skyline of New York ruined his father's masterpiece. I think that we think of it as a beautiful picture with a beautiful frame, although I don't love the really tall buildings that are ruining the. Now I like Frederick Law Olmsted Jr. I think they're ruining the skyline, but nothing we can do about it now. Okay, next slide. And one of the things you had to have in your design competition, actually they never said you had to have lakes. All they said was you had to have a place to freeze over for skating. And so many of the 32 entries in the design competition had no water bodies, but Olmsted and Vaux designed 7 water bodies in the park, all man-made. Central Park's water bodies are just like your kitchen sink or your bathtub. We turn them off and we can turn them on, and we do that all the time for maintenance purposes. And of course, in the winter, the ice freezes. Next slide, please. So here's the lake. Next slide. The Harlemere up at the north end of the park. Next slide. And so then here we have Asher B. Durand. Really, he did so many woodland pictures, picturesque. They were the picturesque. And one of them is very dense. The one on the left is very dense into the woods or in the woods. And then the beaches, which is over on the right, is very much about the way Olmsted and Vaux designed Central Park, because you can see that you're coming out of a dense woodland into some other kind of space. It's the dark, shady, into the light. And that's exactly the way in which Olmsted and Vaux wanted you to see Central Park. You'd be in the woods, and all of a sudden you'd see some light ahead. And it would open up, you'd get to the edge, and it would be a giant lake or a giant meadow. An element of surprise, from dark to light, from open to closed. That's constantly what's happening in Central Park. Next slide, please. So here's another study that Durand did with woodland and a waterfall. Next slide. And here is a 19th century photograph with dense plantings and man-made waterfalls that Olmsted and Vaux designed for the park. And they still, you know, look like that today. I don't know if many of you have been in the North End. Next slide, please. But this is what's up there. And so if you have not been to the North End of the park, it is the most beautiful. And the most thrilling. What you're looking at in this photograph is artfully placed boulders blasted from the Manhattan schist that's underneath Central Park and of course in Central Park, and New York City drinking water flowing over it. But if you think you're in the Adirondacks or similar landscape, that is what they wanted you to feel. Next slide, please. And here is the Ramble, closer to 77th Street, Azalea Pond. Inside, you know, could be a painting by Durand any day. Next slide, please. And also up at the north end of the park in a different season, boulders strewn everywhere, all natural boulders that were brought in from the glacier, 11,000 years ago, dumped on Manhattan Island. Next slide, please. And beautiful rustic work that the Central Park Conservancy has now replicated. There were one existing rustic shelter in the park. Olmsted and Vaux had created hundreds of rustic elements in the park. There were only 3 left. Two rebuilt by 1984 when I came, and one that was original in the Ramble to the park. And now we have the rustic work all over the park. Next few slides, this is right at 59th Street, and here it is at Chess and Checkers, the bridges. And so the greatest innovation for Central Park were the transverse roads. I'm sure many of you have come to the city and driven on a bus or a car down below while the park is above. And that is the great innovation because no one thought of that. And I'm pretty sure it was Calvin Fox because he was an architect. He also thought on different levels. And so what you have is the park up there planted up so that you don't even see the 24-hour traffic below. And Olmsted, in his later years, said that he got the idea. I don't think he got the idea, but anyway, he got the idea, according to him, is seeing a fire truck racing across the park. And here is a drawing of a fire truck and a herd of sheep. That's what traffic looked like in 1858 when this drawing. This is traffic. And you know, you can imagine that, and the whole idea for Olmsted and Fox was to get away from the city, not experience the city, and so that you could be in the park and not even know this chaos was going on below. And that's exactly what happens today. And you can't hear the traffic. You have to strain to really look over the transverse roads to even on winter, you can see the traffic much better. But that idea of over and underpasses had never really happened. Next slide, please. Here is the 79th Street one. This is Vista Rock, and they had to blast through 200 feet, and dynamite wasn't invented yet. They had to do this with gunpowder, which was extremely dangerous and had a short fuse, and several people died building Central Park. Mostly it's the Irish that built Central Park because they were the laborers at the time. Next slide, please. And the transverse roads are the inspiration for better or worse, I like to say, of our modern over and underpass highway system. So it had to have a history. Where does everything begin? You know, the almost obvious things, you don't ever think about what the history of it is. The history of highway over and underpasses is Central Park and the transverse roads. Then Calvert Fox took the idea and went inside the park at a later date. Next slide, please. And invented bridges and arches, which were not in their original Greensburg plan. There was like 2 bridges up at the north end, but then they started building beautiful cast iron bridges designed by Calvert Fox, and also bridges for pedestrians. Boats go under, pedestrians go over, bridges go over water, arches go over land. So next slide. Yes, so this is Glenspan Arch, and the West Drive goes right over it, and this is right near a waterfall, and the pedestrians go under it and around it. And this was all inspired and designed by Calvert Fox, but inspired by their transverse roads. Next slide. And this one is the most exciting in the park. It's Huddlestone Arch. It is right kind of where Lenox Avenue, Malcolm X Boulevard, inside the park, about 106th Street. And it is giant boulders blasted from the rock outcrops and formed into a keystone, and there is absolutely no mortar holding this together. It is just friction and pressure and the whole Roman arch system. And it's, you know, kind of scary when you go under it. You don't have to worry because the City of New York engineers and bridges and tunnel people do watch our bridges all the time, as does the Central Park Conservancy. But it's kind of scary because you look up and there's no mortar at all in it. Next slide. And so now we come to the formal elements. So we have the pastoral, the lakes and meadows, the picturesque, which are the woodlands, and now we have the formal elements. Mother Nature does not plant trees in a straight row, and so that's how you know you're in a formal element. And so here are the mall, which was the only straight line in Central Park, a quarter mile of American elms, the largest existing stand of true American elms in this country. They are the most important horticultural feature of Central Park. Next slide. So here is about 1900. The first trees died right away. The second trees lived to about 1900 until they hit rock and clay, and they were cut down. Next slide. And so our trees, this is our trees today, and they are 103 years old. And they are doing well, even though there are new species that replicate. They're not subject to the Dutch elm disease that the other trees were. Every college campus and every main street in America will align with these trees until the 1930s, when Dutch elm disease came to America and killed them all. These trees were planted in 1922, and the disease hits more mature trees, and so our trees were saved. Eventually, they do get Dutch elm disease, and we inspect, and if necessary, take down the tree if we have to. Lightning took down a few trees since I worked there. But for the most part, you get this incredible canopy of American elms that you get nowhere else in this country. These are the real deal. And they're really well cared for. A huge amount of our budget goes into caring for the trees. Next slide. Oh yeah, here it is in fall. I mean, it's unbelievably beautiful. Next slide. And so you can see that there are benches around the trees, and that's because the mayor wanted to have music. And so he put up a bandstand. And in 1862, Umstead and Fox did not want this, but the mayor and the commissioners, okay, we'll have it. And so people started listening to the music and sitting on the roots of the young trees. And so Calvert Fox was in Umstead, they were horrified, they were going to kill the trees. And so what Calvert Fox did is design fences to act as benches to protect the trees. And they all, fell apart. But in 1990 something, the Conservancy put them back, and they're still there based on these original photographs that we have. And now they're kind of old, and we're going to do them all. We're raising money to do them all over again. So we're always raising money, just like Durand-Hedden House always raising money. That's what nonprofits do. Anyway, because the city of New York doesn't even pay for 25% of the capital projects and almost none of the maintenance of the park. I should stop by saying that. I mean, none of you are probably New Yorkers, but if you think, I say to New Yorkers, if you think that your tax dollars are making this clean, this safe, and this beautiful, you're not even 25% right, because almost all of it is private money. Thank you. So next slide, please. So then we have Bethesda Terrace, the fashioned on an Italian villa, and a grand fountain designed by Emma Stebbins. This was at the end of the mall, and it's where the pastoral lake, the picturesque woodland across the way, and the formal terrace all come together. All three kinds of landscape come together at this central portion of the park, and basically 72nd Street. Next slide, please. The carvings are amazing. They were done by Europeans who came to America, but Jacob Ray Mould, who was the third sort of other silent partner of Frederick Law Olmsted and Calvert Fox, designed them. And you can see like the four seasons, so there's the deer, hunted deer for fall, the baby birds in the nest for spring, the busy bees of summer in their hive, and the bare branches with the birds grown up on, sitting on the bare branches. If you look at the carvings of Bethesda Terrace, they're amazing, and they all date from pre-Civil War. Next slide. And here's the fountain by Emma Stebbins. I just finished writing an article about the fountain and Emma. Next slide. Here it is today. And actually, this year, we're restoring the whole thing, because the water gets clogged in the pipes underneath haven't been done in years. And so, and there's pieces of bronze missing that they have never made, but are in the drawings, or maybe in the photographs. They disappeared. So it's going to be better than ever. Don't go expecting it to look like this soon, for about a year. Okay, next slide. The terrace, here it is. The terrace will still be open, but they will be working on the fountain. Next slide, please. And so underneath, because actually the top of the terrace is the 77th Street crossroad. And Underneath is the transverse. So you go down the mall in this beautiful, dappled, sunny, shady area, and then you descend steps into this jewel box-like arcade with these beautiful mitten tiles. The mitten tiles on the ceiling are the only instance of these tiles on a ceiling in the world. They're still made in Stoke-on-Trent, England. We restored them. Our biggest historic preservation project was restoring these tiles back in 2000, took 4 years. They're encaustic tile. They're meant for floors. So if you've gone to the Capitol building and you see the floors of the Capitol building, those too are mitten tiles, and they're encaustic. So the color isn't just on the surface of the tile, it's baked all the way through. The tiles are over an inch. They're not like the things we buy today. They're over an inch of clay, and the color, like blue, is all the way through. So if you scuff each layer, you still keep getting blue and green and yellow. And they thought of everything, but this is the only time they're on the ceiling. And each one of them had a lock and key so that they wouldn't fall on your head and kill you. And so 15,300 something tiles. Next slide, please. And you can see beautiful carvings that remind you of Jacob Remold did all of this. And there's a new book out by Frank Cassidy, the Vox Scholar, on Jacob Remold. I urge you all, if you're interested, to read that book. And so next slide. So there's beautiful carvings. And then the park started to change. The carousel came during the Tweed administration, and it was turned by a crank, which could make you very cranky. And that is how that word came about. And so, but they were on hobby horses. They were called flying horses, not carousel. And they were held from the roof on a string. Then a few years later, they had a real horse and mule built a whole carousel that was turned on a crank by a horse and a mule under the ground. And then electrified in the 20s, and then it burned down. And in 1950, they had an abandoned carousel at Coney Island, and that's the one we have today. Next slide. I think we have a picture of it. Yes, this one is a masterpiece of American folk art by folk art Russian carvers Stein and Goldstein. They were in Brooklyn, and you know where Coney Island is, and it was moved to Central Park in 1950 when the other one burned down. Next slide. And so Central Park always had a zoo. The reason it had a zoo is because P.T. Barnum in the winter needed a place to put his animals, and he put them in Central Park, and they were like, oh, I guess we have a zoo. And so that was not a plan. And so Philadelphia was supposed to have the first zoo. We beat them to it thanks to P.T. Barnum. Next slide. Yeah, here's the zoo rebuilt. These are the only fake rocks in Central Park, in the seal pond. Next slide. Then we got a greenhouse. Next slide. And Conservatory Garden was created in 1937. Today it's open after a 6-year renovation. The pink trees are gone because they no longer make crabapple trees. But now they're all white, but we've been growing them for over 15 years, and they're tall and they're beautiful. They were beautiful. I never had seen them until this spring. So if you have not seen the formal garden, 6-acre formal garden in Central Park, is just on 5th Avenue at 105th Street. You walk right in. Next slide. So then the park starts changing. I'm almost done, I promise. And the playgrounds start coming in the 30s. Next slide. We still have 34 perimeter playgrounds. Next slide. Statues start coming into the park. Frederick Church was a commissioner who was on a committee to decide when and why statues would be in the park. He didn't really like being a commissioner of the park, so he quit kind of early. but they had this rule that you had to be dead at least 5 years before you could have a statue, and it had to be approved. There were all these rules that, that no one paid attention. But no one alive is in the park. And so Shakespeare and Indian Hunter are wonderful by James Quincy Adams Ward. Next slide. And we have then, of course, around 1900, they have to reconfigure the drive for automobiles. Like on a beautiful spring day, 80,000 automobiles were counted in a spring drive in Central Park. I mean, really, I guess people, but they changed the park because of the automobile a lot. Next slide. And then before Moses, they built the bandshell around 1923 and tore down the little bandstand. Next slide. And then Moses built a boathouse at the north end in 1941. So you can see that, as I said before, the 20th century, the park is really changing. Next slide. Wallman Rink, because people want to skate when it's warm out still. It's not cold enough, they can't skate. So then they have Wallman Rink, created in 1950. Next, Shakespeare in the Park comes in 1966. Delacorte Theater is about to open after 1 or 2 years of being closed. Next slide. And then the mass concerts start with the Philharmonic in 1961. And then next slide. This is the first popular music as we would know it. In 1967, anybody there? 1967, Barbra Streisand. Anybody come to that concert? No, I didn't either. I had no idea I would ever work for Central Park in 1967. But anyway, this is what it looked like. And next slide. This is it, the next day. And the park kept going down and down and downhill. And show the next several slides in a row. So protests of Vietnam War, and the park is not being managed. The city's absconded all responsibility. The park is a total mess, covered in graffiti and garbage. The catch basins are clogged. The garbage is everywhere. There's no one in charge. And next slide. And so this is the Sheep Meadow in 1980 is the first restoration of the park in almost half a century. And next slide. And so you can see the Great Lawn. Next slide. Just keep going because all of these are before and after. Belvedere Castle, that was just restored. The dairy. All the bridges had to be redone. People were using them as urinals, so no one went underneath. And then go back, and so this is Lasker Rink, which came in 1966 and looked like something from Disneyland. Everyone hated it. It was sinking into the Harlem Mere. And last week, next slide, opened the Davis Center, which is now an oval, not a round shape, the way Lasker was, so that you go from the Woodlands through a narrow corridor to the open Harlem Mere. And it's a glassed-in, totally sustainable building, lots of programs, lots of tours, lots of new things, really exciting happening, and that's all because of the Central Park Conservancy that raised $100 million for this building. And so if any of you, just a little, have any friends in New York that you need to give a gift to, particularly if they're moving to New York often, it would be lovely if you could buy them a membership for the Central Park Conservancy. They start at only $50. I can't, I am an advocate for Durand-Hedden House, which I hope you will also support. But especially your local parks, you must support your local parks because if you don't know, no one else will. The city budgets can't control how much use and what importance a park brings to a community. And so, they're not the icing on the cake, they are the cake itself. Anyway, thank you. I'll take questions if you have, if I